The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Sarah Winters heard the first tap against her kitchen window. At first, she dismissed it as falling acorns, common enough in their wooded suburban neighborhood. The second tap, however, made her look up from the scrambled eggs she was preparing for her children's breakfast. What she saw made her drop the spatula with a clatter. There, perched on her windowsill as casually as if it belonged there, was a barred owl. Its feathers were a beautiful mixture of brown and white stripes, and its dark eyes seemed to stare right through the glass with an unnervingly intelligent gaze. But what truly caught Sarah's attention was what the owl held in its beak, a crumpled piece of paper, yellowed with age. "Emma! Lucas!" She called out, her voice barely above a whisper, afraid of startling the magnificent bird. "Come down here, but quietly." The sound of rushed footsteps thundered down the stairs. Her children had never quite mastered the art of being quiet. Emma, her 10-year-old daughter, reached the kitchen first, her long brown hair still messy from sleep. 8-year-old Lucas followed close behind, his Superman pajamas rumpled and one sock missing. "Mom, what's wrong?" Emma started to ask, but then her eyes widened as she spotted their unusual visitor. "Oh my gosh!" Lucas pushed past his sister, pressing his nose against the window. "Cool, is that a real owl?" The owl, surprisingly, didn't flee from the commotion. Instead, it tilted its head, regarding the children with what Sarah could have sworn was curiosity. Then, very deliberately, it tapped the glass again with its paper-filled beak. "It wants to give us that paper," Emma whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "Mom, can we open the window?" Sarah hesitated. She'd always taught her children to be careful around wild animals, but something about this owl seemed different. It wasn't behaving like a wild creature at all. After a moment's consideration, she carefully approached the window and opened it just a crack. The owl, showing remarkable patience, waited until she stepped back. Then, with graceful precision, it dropped the paper through the gap and onto the kitchen counter. But it didn't fly away. Instead, it remained perched there, as if waiting to see what they would do next. Lucas grabbed the paper before anyone could stop him. "It's all wrinkly and old," he declared, carefully unfolding it. "Be careful with it," Sarah cautioned, moving closer to look over his shoulder. The paper was indeed old, its edges worn and color faded to a pale yellow. As they smoothed it out on the counter, they could see it was part of what appeared to be an old letter, though most of the words were too faded to read clearly. Emma, always the practical one, had already pulled out her phone and was taking pictures of their visitor. "Nobody at school is going to believe this," she said, grinning. "An owl delivering mail like in Harry Potter. But why would an owl bring us an old piece of paper?" Lucas wondered aloud, still studying the mysterious delivery. Sarah was wondering the same thing. In all her 40 years of life, she'd never heard of anything like this happening. She'd seen plenty of owls in their neighborhood. Living on the edge of the woods meant frequent wildlife sightings, but none had ever shown this kind of behavior. The owl continued to watch them through the window, its round eyes moving from one family member to another. There was something almost human-like in the way it observed them, as if it was making sure they had received its delivery properly. "Should we give it something in return?" Emma suggested. "Like a treat or something?" "I don't think we have any owl treats in the pantry," Sarah said with a small laugh, but she was already moving to the refrigerator. She found a piece of raw chicken she'd been planning to use for dinner, and, after a moment's hesitation, cut off a small piece. Carefully, she placed it on the windowsill through the small opening. The owl looked at the offering, then back at Sarah, and with surprising gentleness, took the chicken and ate it. Then, to everyone's amazement, it gave what appeared to be a small bow before spreading its wings and taking flight. The Winters family watched until it disappeared into the trees, then looked at each other in stunned silence. The half-cooked breakfast lay forgotten on the stove, the morning routine completely disrupted by their extraordinary visitor. "Do you think it'll come back?" Lucas asked hopefully. Sarah looked at the mysterious paper on her counter, then at her children's excited faces. "Something tells me," she said slowly, "this is just the beginning." She had no idea just how right she was. The next morning, Sarah's prediction proved true. The owl returned, but this time, the Winters family was prepared. They had spent the previous evening researching owls online and had even called the local wildlife center to ask about their unusual visitor. "That's Scout," said Maria Rodriguez, the wildlife rehabilitator who arrived at their house later that morning. She watched through binoculars as the owl perched in its now familiar spot on the windowsill, another piece of paper clutched in its beak. We released him about 3 months ago. Sarah turned to Maria in surprise. You know this owl? Maria nodded, lowering her binoculars. Scout came to us with a badly injured wing last winter. Someone found him trapped in an old barn. We didn't think he'd ever fly again, but he proved us wrong. She pointed to the owl's left wing, where Sarah could now see a slight droop. See that? The wing healed, but not perfectly. He shouldn't even be able to carry things like those papers. Emma and Lucas sat cross-legged on the kitchen floor, watching Scout through the bottom of the window. The owl seemed completely at ease with his audience, preening his feathers between occasional glances at the humans studying him. But why does he keep bringing papers? Lucas asked, pressing his hand against the glass. Scout tilted his head, regarding the boy with those intelligent eyes. Maria shook her head. That's the strange part. Owls are smart birds, but this kind of behavior, I've never seen anything like it. During his rehabilitation, Scout was always different. More curious about humans than most owls, more willing to interact. But this? She gestured at the paper Scout still held. This is unprecedented. Sarah opened the window slightly, just as she had done the day before. Scout, now familiar with the routine, dropped his delivery and waited patiently as Emma retrieved it. Like yesterday's paper, it was old and yellowed, but this one was different. It appeared to be a page from a student's homework assignment, dated 1975. The really interesting thing, Maria continued, is that he's choosing to stay in this area. Barred owls usually establish territories far from human habitation after release. But Scout has been spotted regularly in this neighborhood. We thought he might be struggling to hunt because of his wing, but he's actually thriving. As if to prove her point, Scout expertly caught the piece of chicken Sarah offered him. However, instead of flying away immediately like the day before, he remained on the windowsill, watching them with what seemed like expectation. He wants us to read it, Emma declared suddenly. Look at how he's waiting. The adults exchanged skeptical glances, but Sarah carefully unfolded the old homework paper. The handwriting was faded but still legible. It was an essay about owls, ironically enough, written by a student named Eleanor. Scout made a soft hooting sound, the first noise they heard from him. Then, to everyone's amazement, he reached into his feathers with his beak and pulled out another scrap of paper, dropping it through the window before anyone could react. This is incredible, Maria breathed, quickly pulling out her phone to record the behavior. In all my years working with raptors, I've never seen anything like this. It's almost as if he's trying to tell us something. Sarah finished, picking up the second paper. This one was a fragment of a newspaper clipping, also from the 1970s. Though most of it was torn away, the visible part showed a photo of a house. Their house, Sarah realized with a start, though it looked much different back then. Lucas tugged at Maria's sleeve. Can we keep him? Like as a pet? Maria smiled but shook her head. Scout's a wild animal, even if he doesn't always act like one. But, she paused, looking thoughtful, I'd like to study this behavior. Would you mind if I set up some cameras? This could be important for understanding owl intelligence and behavior. Sarah nodded, her eyes still on Scout, who had finally taken flight, disappearing into the trees with silent wings. Of course, something tells me he'll be back tomorrow anyway. As Maria set up her equipment and explained how to document Scout's visits, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that these paper deliveries weren't random. The owl was too deliberate, too focused. But what could a rescued owl possibly be trying to tell them? The answer, she would soon discover, was more extraordinary than any of them could have imagined. Over the next 2 weeks, Scout's visits became as regular as clockwork. Sarah started keeping a detailed journal of each delivery, noting that the owl arrived precisely at 7:15 a.m. every morning, never a minute early or late. The family had developed a routine around these visits, with Emma and Lucas racing downstairs each morning to see what new piece of paper their feathered friend would bring. Look at this pattern, Sarah said one morning, spreading all the collected papers across their dining room table. Maria Rodriguez, who had become a frequent visitor to document Scout's behavior, leaned in to examine them. The collection now included old letters, homework assignments, newspaper clippings, and even pieces of what appeared to be personal diaries. They're not random, Emma declared, arranging the papers by date. Her interest in the mystery had turned her into quite the detective. See? Almost all of them are from the 1970s, and lots of them mention the same people. Lucas, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. And Scout always taps the window 3 times before dropping them. Always 3 times, Mom. I've been counting. Maria nodded, making notes on her tablet. The consistency is remarkable. Most owls are creatures of habit, but this level of precision. She shook her head in amazement. The scientific community is fascinated. My latest video of Scout has gone viral in ornithology circles. Sarah picked up one of the more recent deliveries, a torn page that mentioned something about a local library. What I don't understand is where he's finding all these papers. They're old, but they're relatively well preserved, as if they've been protected from the elements. And why does he only bring them to us? Emma added, frowning thoughtfully. There are lots of houses in the neighborhood. As if on cue, they heard the familiar tap 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 on the kitchen window. Everyone turned to see Scout perched in his usual spot, right on time at 7:15 a.m., with today's delivery in his beak. But today was different. Instead of his usual patient waiting, Scout seemed agitated. He kept shifting from foot to foot, his feathers slightly puffed out, making him look larger than usual. When Sarah opened the window, he dropped not 1, but 3 papers in quick succession. Something's got him excited, Maria observed, watching as Scout remained at the window, hooting softly, another unusual behavior for their typically silent visitor. Emma carefully gathered the 3 papers. The first 2 were similar to their previous deliveries, old documents from the 1970s. But the third paper made her gasp. Mom, she exclaimed, her hands trembling slightly. Mom, look at this. Sarah took the paper from her daughter's hands and felt her heart skip a beat. Unlike the other deliveries, this paper was familiar, too familiar. It was a page from her grandmother's journal, the one that had gone missing during their move into the house 3 years ago. That's impossible, she whispered, running her fingers over her grandmother's distinctive handwriting. This was in a box that got lost when we moved. We searched everywhere for it. Maria leaned in closer, intrigued. You're certain it's the same journal? Absolutely, Sarah replied. Look at this doodle in the margin. My grandmother always drew these little flowers when she was thinking. And this entry, it's about my 10th birthday party. I remember her writing about it. Scout watched them through the window, his large eyes fixed on the journal page. For a moment, Sarah could have sworn she saw something like satisfaction in those intelligent eyes. Lucas tugged at his mother's sleeve. Maybe Scout knows where the rest of Grandma's journal is. Maybe that's what he's been trying to tell us all along. The adults exchanged glances. It seemed impossible, yet. The timing of the deliveries, the specific papers he chooses, and now this, Maria mused, her scientific skepticism warring with the evidence before her. It's as if he's been leaving us a trail of breadcrumbs. Sarah looked back at Scout, who was still watching them intently. But a trail to what? Scout responded with another soft hoot, then spread his wings and took off. Instead of disappearing into the trees as he usually did, however, he flew to the old garden shed at the back of their property, circled it once, and then vanished into the woods. Emma jumped up from her chair. Did you see that? He wants us to check out the shed. Sarah stared at the weathered old structure she'd barely given a second thought to since moving in. What secrets could be hiding in there? And how did Scout know about them? The mystery was deepening, and they were finally getting close to some answers. Emma's discovery about Scout's intelligence sparked a new wave of interest from the scientific community. One crisp morning, Dr. James Chen, a renowned ornithologist from the State University, joined the regular group of observers in the Winter's kitchen. Fascinating, he muttered, watching Scout perform his now familiar paper delivery routine. In my 30 years of studying owls, I've never seen anything quite like this. He turned to Maria. And you say he only delivers historically significant papers? Before Maria could answer, Emma proudly showed Dr. Chen her carefully organized binder. Over the past few weeks, she had documented every single delivery, complete with photographs and notes about Scout's behavior. Her 5th grade teacher had even allowed her to present Scout's story as a special science project. See, Emma pointed to her charts. Scout brings specific types of papers. They're all connected to this house or the area around it. And look at this pattern I found. He brings newspaper clippings on Mondays, letters on Wednesdays, and personal documents on Fridays. Dr. Chen adjusted his glasses, clearly impressed by the young girl's detailed analysis. This suggests a level of cognitive organization that we've never observed in owls before. Even the most intelligent birds typically don't demonstrate this kind of systematic behavior. Sarah watched as Scout performed his usual 3 taps on the window. Today's delivery was different. It was a photograph, old and sepia-toned, showing a woman standing in front of what appeared to be a large collection of books. "Wait a minute," Lucas said, squinting at the photo. "Mom, isn't that our shed in the background?" Sarah took the photograph for a closer look. Indeed, the garden shed was visible behind the woman, looking much newer than its current weathered state. But what caught her attention was the woman herself. She was holding an owl that looked remarkably similar to Scout. "Dr. Chen," Sarah called, passing him the photograph. "What do you make of this?" The ornithologist studied the image carefully. The owl in this picture, the marking pattern is nearly identical to Scout's. But that's impossible. Barred owls typically only live 8 to 10 years in the wild. This photo must be at least 40 years old. Unless, Maria interjected, Scout found a connection to this place, to this history. Owls are known to be territorial. Maybe he discovered something that made him choose this specific location. As they discussed the possibilities, Scout remained at the window, watching them with an intensity that seemed almost human. When Lucas approached the window, the owl did something unprecedented. He dropped another photograph through the gap. This one showed the same woman, but now she was inside what appeared to be a room filled with books and papers. On the wall behind her was a familiar-looking map of their town. "Mom," Emma exclaimed, "that looks like the inside of our shed, but it's full of books." Sarah remembered how Scout had circled the shed the day before. "Do you think?" she began, but was interrupted by a series of urgent hoots from Scout. The owl was now flying between the window and the shed, his behavior more animated than they'd ever seen. He would fly to the shed, circle it once, then return to the window, repeating the pattern. "He's trying to tell us something," Lucas insisted, practically bouncing with excitement. "We need to check out the shed." Dr. Chen was rapidly taking notes. "This is extraordinary behavior. The owl appears to be deliberately leading you to a specific location. This goes beyond simple intelligence. It suggests purpose, intent." Sarah looked at the growing collection of papers and photographs on her kitchen table, then at Scout's insistent movements between the window and the shed. The mystery of the papers, her grandmother's missing journal, the old photographs, and now this clear indication from Scout. It all seemed to be pointing to the same place. "Well," she said, reaching for her jacket, "I think it's time we finally took a proper look at that old shed. Emma, grab your flashlight. Lucas, get the key from the utility drawer. Dr. Chen, Maria, would you like to join us?" As they prepared to investigate, Scout landed on the shed's roof, watching their approach with what seemed like approval. The morning sun cast long shadows across the yard, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to uncover something remarkable. The answers to their questions about Scout's unusual behavior lay just behind that weathered door. What they would find inside would exceed even their wildest expectations. The old garden shed's door creaked loudly as Sarah turned the rusty key. Scout, still perched on the roof, hooted softly as if encouraging them forward. Dr. Chen had his camera ready, while Maria stood close by, notebook in hand, documenting every moment of this unusual investigation. "It's so dusty," Lucas exclaimed, waving his hand in front of his face as particles danced in the beam of Emma's flashlight. The shed's interior seemed ordinary at first glance. Garden tools hung on walls, old flower pots stacked in corners, and cobwebs decorated every surface. But Sarah's eyes were drawn to something unusual. The wooden floorboards didn't extend all the way to the back wall. Instead, there was a square metal handle nearly hidden under an old piece of carpet. "Emma, shine your light over here," Sarah called, kneeling to brush away years of dust from the handle. Everyone gathered around as she pulled, revealing what appeared to be a trapdoor. A basement in a shed? Maria wondered aloud. That's not common in this area. With everyone's help, they managed to lift the heavy door, revealing a set of narrow stairs descending into darkness. The air that wafted up smelled old but dry, not musty like one might expect from an underground room. "Look!" Emma's flashlight beam caught something reflecting at the bottom of the stairs. There's something down there. Sarah went first, testing each step carefully before allowing the children to follow. Dr. Chen and Maria brought up the rear, their own flashlights adding to the illumination. What they found at the bottom made them all gasp in amazement. The basement was much larger than the shed above, and every wall was lined with wooden shelves. But it wasn't the size that surprised them, it was what filled those shelves. Books. Hundreds of them. And not just books. There were boxes and wooden chests, all carefully arranged and remarkably well preserved. It's like a private library, Dr. Chen observed, running his fingers along the spines of the books. And look at these dates. Most of these are from the 1970s or earlier. Sarah's attention was caught by something familiar, a chest in the corner with her grandmother's initials carved into it. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing stacks of journals and letters. "Mom," she called out, her voice shaking. "These are all Grandma's missing journals. But how did they end up here?" Before anyone could respond, they heard Scout's distinctive hoot from above. The owl had flown down the stairs and now perched on a nearby shelf, looking thoroughly at home in the underground library. Emma was examining a framed photograph on one of the shelves. "Mom, look at this. It's the same woman from the pictures Scout brought us." The photograph showed the woman standing in this very room, surrounded by books and papers. A small plaque beneath it read, "Eleanor Matthews, local historian and teacher, 1975. "Eleanor Matthews?" Sarah repeated, the name striking a chord in her memory. She reached for one of her grandmother's journals, flipping through it quickly. "Here, Grandma wrote about her. Eleanor was her best friend when they first moved to the neighborhood. She ran a private library from her home, which must have been our house." Lucas, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly pointed to something behind Eleanor's photograph. "There's another picture back here." Sarah carefully removed the second photograph, and everyone leaned in to look. It showed Eleanor again, but this time she was caring for an injured barred owl. The back of the photo had writing on it. "My faithful friend Oliver, guardian of the library, 1975. Maria gasped. The marking pattern on that owl. It's almost identical to Scout's. Could Scout be related to Oliver? Emma wondered. Is that why he knew about this place? Dr. Chen shook his head in amazement. Owls don't typically pass down knowledge of locations through generations, but there's so much about animal intelligence we don't understand. This is unprecedented. Sarah was still examining her grandmother's journal. According to this, Eleanor dedicated her life to preserving local history. She collected everything: documents, photographs, letters. When she became ill, she worried about her collection being lost or destroyed. Grandma wrote that Eleanor created this underground library to protect it all. Scout hooted again, softer this time, and flew to perch near the chest containing the journals. Sarah looked at him with new understanding. Somehow, this remarkable owl had not only discovered this hidden treasury of local history, but had also chosen to share it with them. But as they would soon learn, they had only uncovered the first layer of Eleanor Matthews' extraordinary legacy. The discovery of Eleanor Matthews' underground library quickly spread through the small town. Over the next few days, the Winters home became a hub of activity as local historians arrived to examine the collection. But it was Eleanor's daughter, Patricia Matthews, who provided the most surprising revelations when she visited one sunny afternoon. "I can't believe it's all still here," Patricia said softly, running her hands along the bookshelves in the underground room. She was a tall woman in her 60s, with the same kind eyes as her mother in the old photographs. "Mom always said she had a special place for her collection, but she never told me where it was." Sarah offered Patricia a cup of tea as they sat among the carefully preserved documents. Scout, who had been watching from his usual perch, hooted softly at the newcomer's presence. "And who do we have here?" Patricia asked, looking up at the owl with obvious interest. "That's Scout," Emma explained proudly. "He's the one who helped us find everything." She quickly showed Patricia her binder of Scout's paper deliveries and photographs. Patricia's eyes widened as she looked through Emma's documentation. "This is remarkable," she said, posing at the photograph of Eleanor with Oliver, the owl from 1975. "You know, Mom always said Oliver was more than just an ordinary owl. She believed some animals had old souls." "What do you mean?" Lucas asked, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her. Patricia smiled, pulling out an old leather journal from her bag. I brought this when I heard about your discovery. It's Mom's personal diary. She wrote about everything that happened here, especially about Oliver. Sarah and the children gathered closer as Patricia opened the journal. Even Scout seemed interested, gliding down to a lower shelf to listen. According to Mom's writings, Oliver came to her in 1974 with an injured wing, just like your Scout, Patricia began. She nursed him back to health, but he chose to stay. She said he was different from other owls. He would bring her things he found in the woods, mostly old papers and photographs that people had thrown away. Just like Scout, Emma exclaimed. Patricia nodded. Mom was passionate about preserving local history. She believed every story, every piece of paper, held importance. Oliver seemed to understand this. He would watch her organize her collection for hours, and sometimes he'd even help her by carrying papers from one shelf to another. But how did all of Grandma's journals end up here? Sarah asked, gesturing to the chest in the corner. Ah, Patricia's eyes lit up with recognition. Your grandmother, Helen, was Mom's closest friend. When Mom got sick in 1980, she worried about what would happen to her collection. Helen promised to help protect it. They must have moved her journals here for safekeeping. Lucas, who had been thinking hard, suddenly spoke up. So, Scout found this place while hunting, just like Oliver used to hunt here. And maybe he saw all the papers and remembered something. Dr. Chen, who had been quietly taking notes, joined the conversation. While owls don't typically inherit memories, they can inherit instincts and behavioral patterns. It's possible that Scout, perhaps descended from Oliver's family line, felt a natural connection to this place. Mom would have loved this, Patricia said, watching Scout, who had now moved to perch near Oliver's old photograph. She always said her library needed a guardian. When Oliver disappeared after she got sick, she was heartbroken. But maybe, she paused, looking thoughtfully at Scout, maybe he never really left. Maybe his family has been watching over this place all along. Maria, who had been documenting Scout's behavior, added it would explain his unusual intelligence and his specific interest in paper. If his ancestors lived around humans who valued these items, it could have influenced the development of these unique behaviors. Sarah looked around the underground library, seeing it with new eyes. So when we moved in 3 years ago, Scout, or his family, must have already been here, Patricia finished. Watching, waiting for the right moment to reveal this place to someone who would understand its importance. The room fell quiet as everyone contemplated this extraordinary connection between past and present. Scout hooted softly, almost as if confirming their theories, before flying up to tap at one of the old photographs with his beak. What do you want to show us now? Emma asked, reaching for the photograph. As she carefully removed it from the shelf, several more papers fluttered to the floor. Papers that would lead them to an even more remarkable discovery about Eleanor Matthews and her extraordinary legacy. The mystery of Scout and the underground library was far from over. The papers that fell from behind the photograph turned out to be Eleanor's most precious documents, her personal research about the town's hidden history. Among them was a detailed map of underground tunnels that connected several historic buildings, including their house. These tunnels were used during the Underground Railroad, Patricia explained, carefully spreading the yellowed papers on a table they brought down to the underground library. Mom spent years documenting them, but she never shared her findings publicly. She was waiting until she could prove everything without a doubt. Sarah examined the map with growing amazement. According to Eleanor's notes, their house had been a key safe house in the 1800s. The underground library wasn't just a storage room. It had been part of a larger network of secret spaces. Look at this. Emma pointed to a small marking on the map. There's another room behind that wall. She shone her flashlight at the far wall of the library, where old books were stacked nearly to the ceiling. Scout, who had been watching them intently, suddenly flew to that exact spot. He landed on one of the shelves and began tapping at a particular book with his beak. Dr. Chen carefully removed the book, revealing a small brass handle hidden behind it. Incredible, he whispered. The owl knows about this too. Working together, they cleared the shelves and found what appeared to be a door, cunningly disguised as part of the wall. It took both Sarah and Patricia to push it open, revealing a smaller room beyond. The beam of their flashlights illuminated something extraordinary. The walls were covered with photographs, newspaper clippings, and handwritten accounts, all carefully preserved. But what caught everyone's attention was a collection of small wooden boxes arranged on a central table. Mom's time capsules, Patricia breathed, her eyes filling with tears. She told me about these, but I never knew where she kept them. Each box contained carefully preserved artifacts, letters from escaped slaves thanking the homeowners for their help, old coins, photographs of important local figures, and detailed accounts of the town's history that had never been included in official records. Your mother wasn't just preserving history, Maria observed, gently examining one of the boxes. She was protecting stories that might have been lost forever. Scout flew into the room and perched on the table, watching as they discovered each new treasure. When Lucas opened one particular box, the owl became especially animated, whooping and fluttering his wings. Inside that box was a collection of photographs showing Oliver, Eleanor's owl, helping her organize and protect her documents. There was also a letter, written by Eleanor herself, dated just weeks before she passed away. To whoever finds this room, I entrust these memories to you. Every paper, every photograph, every artifact tells a story that deserves to be remembered. Oliver has been my faithful friend and guardian in this work. I pray that somehow this place will find another guardian, another protector who understands the importance of preserving our past. Eleanor Matthews. Sarah looked at Scout, who met her gaze with those intelligent eyes. She got her wish, she said softly. The guardianship never ended. It was passed down through generations of owls, just like these stories were passed down through generations of people. Dr. Chen was rapidly taking notes. This is unprecedented in animal behavior studies. The idea that a learned behavior could be passed down through generations of owls, maintaining a specific purpose. Maybe some things can't be explained by science alone, Patricia suggested, watching as Scout flew to perch near Oliver's old photographs. Mom always said that some bonds transcend our understanding. Emma had been unusually quiet, but now she spoke up. So what do we do with all of this? These stories need to be shared, right? That's what Eleanor would have wanted. Patricia nodded. Yes, but we need to do it carefully, respectfully. These aren't just historical artifacts, they're pieces of people's lives. And we'll need help, Sarah added, looking around at the room full of precious historical documents. This is bigger than just us now. Scout hooted softly, as if in agreement. He flew to the doorway between the rooms, looking back at them expectantly. There was still more to discover, more stories to uncover, and their faithful feathered guide wasn't finished showing them all the secrets of Eleanor Matthews' extraordinary legacy. The next step in their journey would reveal the true purpose behind Scout's persistent paper deliveries, and it would change their understanding of not just local history, but of the remarkable connections between past and present. The discovery of Eleanor Matthews' underground library and its historical treasures transformed the Winters' lives in ways they never expected. Over the next few months, their home became a center for historical preservation, with experts from universities and museums carefully documenting each artifact. But the most remarkable part of the story remained Scout, who continued his daily visits even after all the secrets had been revealed. One morning, as Sarah watched him perform his familiar window-tapping routine, Patricia arrived with news that would complete their understanding of this extraordinary tale. I found this in Mom's summer cottage, Patricia said, placing a small wooden box on the kitchen table. It was hidden in the attic, with instructions to open it 30 years after her death. Today marks exactly 30 years. The family gathered around as Patricia opened the box. Inside was a single envelope and a worn leather collar with a small brass tag. The tag had a name engraved on it. Oliver. Mom's last letter, Patricia said softly, opening the envelope. Scout flew from his window perch to settle on the back of an empty chair, watching intently as she began to read. My dearest Patricia. By now, the library will have been found, if Oliver's legacy endured as I prayed it would. You see, I didn't just rescue Oliver that day in 1974. He rescued me, showing me that some bonds go beyond what we can explain. When I discovered my illness, I worried about who would protect our town's stories. Oliver seemed to understand. In those final months, I watched him teaching younger owls, his own offspring, about the papers, the library, the importance of what we had built together. I couldn't be certain, but I had faith that this knowledge would pass down through generations of his family, until the right people came to understand its significance. If you're reading this, then my faith was not misplaced. Sarah looked at Scout, who had been unusually still during the reading. The slight droop in his left wing, just like Oliver's old injury. The same intelligent gaze. The same dedication to preserving and protecting Eleanor's legacy. The right people, Emma whispered. She meant us, didn't she? The local historical society worked with the Winters family to establish the Eleanor Matthews Memorial Library in the renovated house. The underground rooms were preserved exactly as they had been found, with guided tours sharing the remarkable story of Eleanor, Oliver, and Scout. Dr. Chen published several papers about Scout's behavior, revolutionizing understanding of animal intelligence and inherited behaviors. The story attracted worldwide attention, with people traveling from across the globe to witness Scout's daily paper deliveries. But the most meaningful outcome was much more personal. The Winters family, along with Patricia, established a scholarship program using funds from Eleanor's estate. Each year, it would support students interested in historical preservation and wildlife conservation, a perfect blend of Eleanor's two greatest passions. Scout remained a constant presence, and as the years passed, they noticed younger owls watching from nearby trees, learning his paper-delivering routine. The legacy would continue, just as Eleanor had hoped. One evening, as Sarah sat in the garden watching Scout teach a younger owl how to handle papers without damaging them, Lucas asked the question they'd all wondered about. Do you think Scout knew what he was doing all along? That he was helping us find something important? Sarah thought about Eleanor's words, about bonds that go beyond explanation. She watched as Scout demonstrated his window-tapping technique to his apprentice, just as Oliver had once taught his own family. I think, she said carefully, that some stories are meant to be preserved, and some connections are meant to be maintained. Scout didn't just help us find a collection of old papers. He helped us understand that the past is never really gone. It just needs the right guardians to keep it alive. The young owl attempted its first window tap under Scout's watchful eye, and Sarah smiled. Eleanor Matthews' legacy would live on, not just in the preserved documents and historical records, but in the remarkable bond between a family of owls and the human family they had chosen to trust with their precious responsibility. As the sun set over the garden, Scout's soft hoot seemed to echo Eleanor's words. Some bonds truly do transcend our understanding, connecting past and present in ways that remind us that the most extraordinary stories are often the ones that find us when we least expect them. The end.